Oh boy, this one's gonna be a long one, but bear with me here. Sit back and grab some popcorn and let's talk about cameras. This is the Canon EOS R and I've been using this now for 3 or 4 months. I wanna say almost when it first came out. And on paper, it's just pretty underwhelming compared to the competition. But I'm gonna tell you guys why I've been using this camera, why it's the best mirrorless camera, wait for it, that I've ever used, okay? That's keyword I, not you, I, or anybody else. This camera has worked phenomenal for me and my workflow, and also many others too that have been in the same or similar situation as myself. Now, this is not a review because I'm not going to talk about specs. You can read that on Canon's website. I'm not going to talk about the photography side really and other things. I'm going to talk about my experience with this camera, why I use it, and why I believe it's the best mirrorless camera for me and possibly others if you're in a similar situation. So let's talk about why I picked this camera. First of all, I was really interested in using a camera from Canon that was mirrorless, mainly because I film with a Canon C200. What you're seeing here is being filmed on a Canon C200. It is my primary camera. I freaking love that camera. I did a review on it. If you're interested in watching that, there will be a link down below so you guys can see that. So I wanted something that would complement my C200. So I thought I would give this a try. And lo and behold, when I first filmed a couple of shots with it and I used C-Log, which is what I use with the C200, I was blown away at how close the image coming from the EOS R matched the C200. In fact, I've called this camera the Baby C200. If you're looking to buy a camera like the C200 but don't want to spend $7,500 but you want to get an equivalent type of quality, this would be the camera, the closest camera in my opinion, this is my opinion, that matches the C200. Take a look at some of these examples. So I filmed on the C200 using 12-bit RAW, and then what I did was I took the lens out of the C200 because I wanted to make sure that I used the exact same lens. I put it on the Canon EOS R and I positioned it on the tripod, try to get a very similar field of view. And I shot this with the Atomos Ninja V using 10-bit to try to get the highest quality on the EOS R and see how close I could get it to match to the Canon RAW. And lo and behold, literally dropping that exact same LUT that I used to get a really nice color grade on the C200, I put it on the EOS R in 10-bit 422 and it matched almost to a T. I only had to add maybe slight more saturation and possibly a little bit more contrast just to get that extra punch, but otherwise it was literally an identical match. In fact, one thing that I did notice is that when using the Atomos Ninja V, the image coming out of the EOS R is actually way sharper using the Ninja V only. I have to put that disclaimer. When you're using the 8-bit internal recording, it's not as sharp, but when you're using the external recorder, like this camera literally changes to a whole different animal. The biggest issue I think people have with this camera is that it's a full frame camera, but when you switch it to 4K, if you start to record in 4K, there's approximately a 1.73 times crop on the sensor, which means if you put a full frame 24mm lens on the camera and you record in 4K, that 24mm focal length now becomes about 41mm. Now that's not really an issue for me because I use the C200, which does not have a crop per se, but it does use a super 35mm sensor, which means that even if I adapt a full frame lens on my C200, it doesn't use the full frame. It only uses a portion of it, which is about 1.5 times crop equivalent, which means that that 24mm now becomes a 36mm. So the difference between 36mm and 41, in my opinion, isn't that drastic for me to say, oh, I can't use this camera or it's not gonna work for me. So because I already deal with, if you wanna call it a crop with the C200, because it uses a Super 35, using a 1.7 times crop is not that big of a deal for me. But that is one of the biggest issues I think people have with this camera, which for me, it's not that big of a deal. So at the beginning of the video, I talked about how this is almost like a little Baby C200. You have the ability to shoot and record at a really high bit rate, not only internally, but also externally. So you can use like a recorder like the Ninja V and get 10-bit 422. Now, you don't necessarily need to use it. It is an option, but the option is there should you choose to. You still have a really high quality 480 megabits per second codec that just gives you really high quality image. It doesn't fall apart. Like, I've had issues with Sony because they can only do 8-bit 420, and I love to film in S-Log, I love to film in log period, and the image, as soon as you start like pushing it and pulling it, it just starts to fall apart, artifacts and everything. I've never seen that with this one here, even at 8-bit internal, and obviously external is just much better. The other thing I feel that this is more like the Baby C200 is because there are options, for example, this adapter that was actually made from Canon. I know there's adapters, I believe PhotoDiox makes one for the Sony A7 series or E-mount, but it's not the same. Trust me, I've used it and it's crappy. This is actually a really high quality variable ND filter that, if you know about the C200 has built-in ND filters, and now with this, you literally have built-in ND filters with this little dial right here. I can add 10 stops of ND filter or remove it and get it down to 1.5 stops, which is very impressive. And having it here natively onto the camera without me having to thread anything on has been epic. I literally just picked this up recently because it just was released, but I feel this alone is worth having a camera like this, especially when filming outside, because you have no idea how important and how clutch this comes in when you're filming outside. And if you really want to get like shallow depth of field, if you want to shoot like at T 1.5 or 1.8 and it's just bright outside, you can just ND up, get it to about 5-6 stops, whatever it is, however bright the sun is, and you can get that shallow depth of field without losing any quality to the image. And that's what makes this more important than those that I've seen from Sony, is because the Sony ones, you start to get these weird artifacts, the colors start to shift. That is not the case with this adapter. There is no loss in quality at all. Now here's two things that I really like about this camera. One of them is like the ergonomics, especially like the side grip right here. It just feels really beefy, very comfortable to hold in the hand, especially when you're taking photos. It just feels rock solid. Like, you're not going to lose the grip in comparison to like the Sony, which I do not like at all. But this just feels really solid. The other thing is the flip out display. Now, I don't vlog and I don't intend to vlog anytime soon, but the flip out display just comes in clutch. And it's just one of those things that it's nice to have. Like when I do over the head shots and I have the camera positioned like this and I need to see, what I can do is I can just flip the display and I can definitely see my top shot. Or also, like if I'm filming something from the side and I need to look at it this way, this comes in so handy. And I gotta say, like when I use cameras like the GH5, I love having a flip out display. Also, when you're transporting the camera, you can actually hide the LCD display so that you can protect it during transportation, which I think is important because a lot of times the camera might be bouncing around or something pokes at it and you can damage the display. Or even when traveling, I mount my camera here and I keep the LCD display covered so that way, if I move around or something, it doesn't get damaged. So little things like that I feel like enhance the camera experience, especially when you're using it for video and also photography. Now, speaking of photography, one of the things that I really like about this camera is the fact that when I take pictures, it will automatically, without me having to do anything, send those pictures, high quality, highest resolution possible, to my iPhone, again, without me having to do anything. I know that Sony does something very similar, but you have to do it within the app. In other words, you have to load up the app and then transfer everything, where in this case, all I have to do is just turn the Wi-Fi on and it'll automatically connect to my iPhone and I can send these pictures, or it does it automatically. I don't even have to do anything. It will send these high resolution pictures to my iPhone. So that makes it really easy if I want to take pictures for like Instagram or even social media, where I use my camera, take a picture and automatically syncs to my phone, and then I can edit it on my phone and have this really high quality image on my smartphone. I know other photographers actually use this on weddings. So what they do is they take these pictures, obviously of the bride that they're shooting in RAW and JPEG, and then they're getting these pictures sent to their smartphone. And then what they're doing is they're sending some of these pictures to the bride, let's say using like AirDrop, and then she's posting these on social media. So now the bride is posting these high quality images on her social media, which makes the photographer look good as opposed to her just snapping some pictures with her phone. So little things like that make a difference to me, especially when using a hybrid camera that shoots both photo and video, that in my opinion enhance the user experience to make it more enjoyable to shoot. Now, the biggest reason why I like to film with this camera mainly is because it matches my C200 so much, and it resembles it a lot in many ways. And I've said this before, like the color science of Canon is just awesome. I personally like it. Now, before you stop me and say, Armando, I've downloaded this custom profile on my Sony that matches Canon, so I've compared it and it looks identical, or I've created this custom profile on Cine 2 with HLG and PPP, and it's like, look, I've done the same thing too. On my Sony cameras, I've had them match my C200 as close as possible, but that's the thing. I don't want to go in there and make those changes. I know that when I picked this camera up, I didn't do anything with the exception of changing it to C-Log. That is it. I don't like to shoot in PP anything, just C-Log. So that's the only thing I did. And that was like an issue when I used to film with Sony, is like I would grab somebody else's Sony camera and it's like, oh, go back to the editing bay. Darn it, I forgot. He doesn't use my Canon picture profile. So now I have to mess with their settings, and now it looks different and yellow and magenta and all that. And it's just a hassle. I know that if I go and shoot with Potato Jet and I pick up his EOS R, I know that I don't have to do anything. I literally just pick it up, film, and if I bring my camera and my C200, we don't have to do anything. It's just gonna work right out of the box. I don't want to deal with those little things. And I know you can, and nowadays all cameras look pretty good and you can get it to match, not even so much Canon, just have a really good image right out of the box by making adjustments. I just don't want to deal with that. I love the image coming out of the box without me having to do anything from Canon. That's one of the biggest reasons why I like my C200. So with that being said, these are the things that I like about the camera. Now, there are things I don't like about this camera, and I'm not trying to apologize. This is just my workflow and it works for me. For example, the lack of slow motion. That's probably the biggest issue for me. I don't even care about the full frame or the crop. I care more about the slow motion. That is like a huge bummer. Now, the good thing is I use this mainly as a B cam, so it's not that big of an issue, but it is a problem when I only take this, let's say on a trip, and I don't take my C200, then it becomes more of an issue. But usually when I use this as a B cam, I use my C200 for a slow motion shot, so that's not really a big deal because I can get a really awesome slow motion from the C200. But if I travel with this, 720p, I mean, that is ridiculous. That's probably the biggest issue I have with this camera. The one SD card slot is not a big deal. Prior to the Sony a7 III, all my Sony cameras only had one. I've never had any issues with only one SD card, and that's just silly. I mean, even higher end cameras like Red, there's only one card, like there's no redundancy there. So to me, that's just like people that blow things out of proportion, and that's just one of them, in my opinion. Yes, you can leave a comment about your story, how you lost footage, but honestly, in today's age, especially with high quality cards, those problems are like almost non-existent. So, I mean, yeah, it'd be nice to have, but even with my a7 III, I never did dual recording. So, I mean, for me, again, just speaking for myself, this is my experience, not an issue for me. But I gotta say, that's probably the biggest gripe I have about this camera is the lack, or really non-existent, of high frame rate. I mean, 720p is just, you might as well not even use it. So at this price point, I feel that Canon really dropped the ball there, and that's probably my biggest gripe with this camera. I mean, I could keep going on about other things that I like. Obviously, it supports EF mounted lenses. Yes, I know Sony does that, but this works natively. It communicates. For example, one of the things I love about this camera that I didn't really talk about earlier is the fact that when you use manual lenses, you have this thing called focus guide, which personally I feel destroys focus peaking, because it's a little box that shows you when you are actually in focus. You don't even have to look or identify any lines. You just position the box where you want your focus to be. And if it's green and those little triangles line up, you know that you are in focus. So little things like that is something that the C200 has, and I really enjoy having it here on the R because that is a useful feature when using manual lenses. But yeah, again, this camera just checks all the marks for me, and this is why I use it. I don't really recommend this camera, even though I use it, because there's a lot of people that don't film with a C200. There's a lot of people that don't use this as a B cam, or have other type of projects in mind. Like for example, I have people that shoot weddings. Like I don't think this is a great wedding video camera. I feel like the Sony a7S II or even the A3 is a much better camera than this one, mainly because I feel that this has decent low light, but it doesn't have the amazing low light that the Sony cameras have. So I still feel that even though I use this camera, I almost never recommend this camera at all because I don't feel that it is the best mirrorless camera out in the market today. It's the best mirrorless camera for me. So I just want to clarify that it works really well for my workflow, but I still feel that there are way better cameras out there. And the only thing that I can hope for is that Canon releases more of their higher end mirrorless cameras soon, so that way if people do want to go on the Canon side because they like the color science, they like the EF lenses that are available, and the fact that these cameras work really well with each other, that possibly they can release that soon, so that way Canon has a better mirrorless camera out there as opposed to this one that's currently representing the mirrorless line for them, which is not the best. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. My name is Armando. Thanks again for watching, and you will catch me in the next one. Adios.